Was that difficult to arrange? You guys to work all together?
Well, Stacy and I just sort of communicated quite casually because our rooms are next to each other. And then I'm less technically informed than Roger and Stacy. So Roger and I spent a whole Pro D day. We met out of the school and we sat down and we talked about project-based learning and with the iPad and using rubrics. So, you know, that was...
And that was the Pro D that they spent when I was with you at your Pro D.
Right.
It was that particular Pro D.
I remember
it was that day. Yeah.
So after that presentation with you, I felt really sort of inspired to adapt a project I already had. And I immediately thought about Anne because we were both doing grade 9. So I thought, how could I adapt this project, which I've had for a while, but it needed a lot of updating in terms of using technology, which is a focus, right, for all of us. And so we spoke about maybe making some changes, and I told her how inspired I sort of was by your workshop and that there were so many things available that it didn't have to be reinventing the wheel. We could just use a lot of the stuff that you were offering and adapt it to fit that. And then Roger just fits in nicely because of the iPads and the Learning Commons and the work that they had done.
It wasn't a new project. It's something that we'd always done with Socials 9. And there is 2 chapters in Socials 9. One is about the geographic areas of North America, and the other is about the native people. And the textbook presents them as the people who live in that area, like the people of the plains, the people of the Arctic. They match the areas, right? So what I've always been trying to get across is why were the lives of those people the way they were in that area? And it was because they lived in that area. So in other words, the connection the people had between the area they lived in and their lives.
And how that land shapes their lives.
Yeah, how they were shaped by geography. That's what we all wanted to get at. And I've always done it through, it's always an oral presentation, but the visual part has always been a poster. And so that is why, because we wanted to extend the use of technology, I was virtually doing the same project, but with the visual being done by Prezi instead of a poster.
We put them into groups. We assigned them a First Nations group that they were responsible for. We gave them the basic outline of what we expected from the presentation, meaning that you're not reading it off the screen, it's not lifted from Wikipedia. We had all that criteria built in that, you know, I think didn't you and Roger create the rubric?
That's what we did. And
they actually created the rubric for a Prezi. And with the kids really familiar now with Prezi, I think they all used Prezi. Maybe a couple still use PowerPoint. I can't remember.
Well, they all used Prezi.
Yeah, and so we sort of said to them, this is sort of the criteria. So go. Now, to just give them the free rein to do the research, you have to be really careful, and that's where these accountability sheets come in, is that because we put them into groups, I found these logs really useful along the way so that they could document who's responsible for what. Keeps them on track, because the concern with group work, of course, is that there's always 1 or 2 very strong students who want to be successful, and then some of the kids aren't as worried about doing as good of a job because they've got those kids that they know are going to pull them through, and so there becomes some resentment amongst the high achieving students that they feel like I'm doing all the work and so-and-so's not pulling their weight. So I found these logs, even though they create more paperwork and they create more checking and it creates a bit of a package at the end that you really have to go through, I found it was really good for me and for the students themselves too, to see we're accountable because so-and-so is doing this. Where are we at this point? They write it down to make sure that they know that I'm paying attention to making sure they're kept up.
You guys did a lot of sharing with this. I mean, there wasn't just one meeting. I remember a number of meetings between the two of you doing this.
And I mean, our original meeting where we sort of decided, okay, here's what we're going to do, and then I adapted it, and we checked it over and tweaked it, and then just meeting along the way, just how's it going? And then the follow-up meeting was, of course, the most powerful because that's when we could compare the notes and say, okay, this really didn't work very well. Here's what we would change for next time.
Like the presentations were visually lovely. They were definitely superior to the poster.
But we really wanted the history and the geography to be combined and to really integrate those themes and integrate those topics. I think it's important for kids to know that they're not 2 separate subject areas. It all goes together and they all influence each other. So, but the kids, the guiding question was there and we did address it. And at the end of the project, I did have them write a response about how they felt their First Nations group was impacted, shaped, you know, according to their geography. They didn't quite get there, and I think that it just needed to be more of a theme. I think they needed more support there. I don't think they got it.
On the other hand, I never stopped talking about that.
I didn't talk about it
And
enough.
I constantly went into it, and I tried to compare it to the fact that many people today have very little connection with nature and with the area they live in. I talked about that every day, and that was my main thing, but they still didn't get that.
But don't forget that you were heading towards Bloom's taxonomy, a very high level.
It's very difficult.
Yeah. So
and they're only grade 9, right?
Plus, it's the first time. This is, I mean, we've done projects, but we've never done project-based learning with an essential question and trying to direct them towards it without specifically saying, here it is. So, ladies, for your first attempt, what's your rating? It's
pretty good.
Yeah,
it was
great.
good.
It was good, yeah. But but what the main thing that we learned, well, there's a couple of main things about the actual presentation. One is that they can have nothing in their hands.
Ah, okay.
Not like you can have a little index card, or you can have a few point form notes, like nothing. And that only in that way will the visual that is on the screen become their cue for talking. Because what happened was there was this beautiful visual, but they were reading notes about something completely different.
Oh, okay.
So the impact of the fabulous prezzies was lost. And I actually tried a similar project with my grade 8s a couple of weeks later on a different topic. There were issues with that as well. But that part of it I solved by having no notes. And they were scared, and they're like, you mean we have to memorize it? And I said, well, not really, because you can look at the picture.
But you need to know it.
That made a huge improvement.
We definitely want to see more with presentations in terms of really having the skill, practice the skill. They're not going to get it perfect. They're only young teenagers, but begin to practice the skill, the art of really showing what you know rather than just reading. There's so much plagiarism, and there's so much just copying and cutting and pasting. Gave them the challenge that you are anthropologists and you're going back in time and you're studying this First Nations group, because the study of Aboriginal people in grade 9 is historical. It's not today. It's back at, you know, right before European contact.
Yeah, before.
So we basically give them this scenario where they go back in time and they have to study this group as though they're there. So when they speak about their experience, and they divide up the tasks for among the group, so one group member will study, you know, housing and clothing or whatever, artistic expression. They need to present it as though they were there. So they need to use first person. They need to say, when I was living with the Haida, I watched them create a totem pole, and this is what it was like, and this is how they did it. And so by doing that, I've always hoped that that would cut back on that plagiarism, because they have to put it into their words truly, because they're using first person. Now we need to take that extra step. I want them to be able to present that way confidently, where they're not
with
reading.
So that
lots of good came out of it, and the kids enjoyed it. I had them fill out the feedback sheet, the reflection sheet at the end. And usually the typical things came out that they wanted more time and all this sort of thing. But they enjoyed it. They enjoyed, and the kids, the high achieving kids, definitely said they liked the built-in accountability of keeping people on track. And so it clearly showed if people didn't do their part, and I assessed them accordingly so that those kids who did do their part would get a different mark than those who basically.
So that would be what I would want to talk to Stacy about next time. How did you do that? You know, how did you assess that self-involvement? Because I think that would be a big difference too. And I can see many other applications as well. A lot for individual presentations. A lot of the kids, especially the good students, could easily do a Prezi by themselves. And so I like to give kids like enrichment topics. For many reasons, either they miss something and they want to make up, or they just want to bump up their mark. So that would be a perfect opportunity for them to do a little Prezi on, you know, character, Henry VIII or James Cook, and get up and present that to the class, which would build their confidence.
One of the other things they say about project-based learning, when you have it all completed and done, they complain about the amount of time it takes. And so a lot of teachers won't do it because of that. Did it take more time?
It does take more time, but I think that it's more authentic. Like, I think it might take more time, but I definitely felt more confident in giving them assessment that just seemed more real. to me. So to me it was worth it, because when you see the amount of work they're putting into the research and the time they're putting into the project, they've invested a lot. So you kind of owe it to them to invest in the assessment. And they assess too, so it's not just me. But it is a bit of work, and I think because it was the first time, like next time it would go more smoothly because I will have done it before. It is a bit of time, but I think it's worth it because they've put a lot of time into it, and I think that it just, there's so many different pieces that you use to assess. I think it just makes it more fair in some ways. You're not just judging it on some gut reaction or something. There's all kinds of pieces of evidence that come together.
The rubric is good, but the rubric is what took us the time. Like, and it took Roger and I almost that whole day to
Let's talk about that rubric.
Yeah. Well, the rubric isn't perfect either, and I've never found a rubric that is, but they're really helpful, and it can certainly be modified. You know, but
it's a good start.
Yeah.
So it's a Prezi. It's for a Prezi.
It's particularly for a Prezi. We had the categories of content, organization, graphics, and then the use of text and background. That was what Roger was teaching them. The actual display, like don't put white print on a pale blue background. The actual, and restricting how many bullet points can you have. You know, finding a picture that's the right size. So we made that a category. But I'll tell you one thing, this doesn't cover the oral component, so you would have to, what we did, I mean, we're very familiar with assessing oral, so I just gave them an individual oral mark from my head, which I felt quite confident in doing. And this was more for the actual Prezi. So the way I did it was each person in the group got this mark, and they got an individual mark for the oral presentation. And then we did other things too. We had a test after, we wrote an essay after, and Stacy did the self-assessment. So there were quite a few pieces of it. But there's one other thing I should mention before we forget, and that is about the actual presentation. This is what I found with the grade 8s when I did the comparable thing with them. They need a whole class to just actually rehearse the presentation.
Yes, we found that this would be helpful.
Yeah, even though the stuff was all done, the Prezi was all done, the notes were all done, but they had never actually done it until they got up. So they really only got to do it that one time. So with the grade 8s, I gave them a class to rehearse it. And that really helped.
And it made a difference.
Yeah, huge difference.
And then they actually practiced. It's part of their visualization of imagining themselves up there doing it, which would have built their confidence a little bit.
Yeah, it did build their confidence.
And they're together, because the kids don't get together outside of school. They can work on Prezi from home all together.
That was the point.
Yeah, is that they can do it separately, but put together one presentation, which is what we should also mention that Roger took a day in the library. We had a class in the library for our classes.
We did. At the beginning,
where Roger went over Prezi with them, how to invite people to work on their Prezi,
how to share
it, and how to save it and all that, and went over sort of that criteria with them. So that was really good. Nice change of scenery too, being in the library, being with a different teacher. Sort of set them up for that. But the practice is key, I think.
Yeah,
we'll definitely do that next time.
Definitely do that next time. And also the one of the good things about the iPads, using the iPads, was that you could be in the library or you could bring them to the classroom. So you had two options. You weren't restricted, oh, I can't get into the library that day. So we were able to have the iPads whenever we wanted.
And because with Learning Commons, and Roger has it, so you can sign them out so they're individualized to you. That worked just perfectly.
It worked out really well.
Yeah, that was a wonderful idea.
Yeah.